Hi, so we are going to next look at the reflex arc. So we just looked at the nervous system and the divisions of the nervous system as well as the endocrine system. So this drawing can just go below the other diagram that you did, but this here would definitely be more the nervous system. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to write reflex arc. Okay, and really what we're looking at here is in how does it work when, let's say I touch something hot, okay? So if I touch like the hot stove or let's say a hot pan, okay? I touch the hot pan, I let go of that hot pan before I'm aware of the pain. And what's happening here is we have our reflex arc, which is another way of saying a spinal cord reflex. So what makes a reflex unique is that it goes directly from your sensory receptors to your spinal cord and then back to your effectors or like your muscles. So the brain actually isn't involved in this process, and we'll explain why in just a second. So here, let's draw our person. Okay, so we have our person here, and we're going to imagine that this person touched a hot stove. Okay, so they're going to be yelling. All right, so the first thing that we have to do is we're going to look at this 5-step process. So what happens first is the sense receptors are going to pick up the information. So your sense receptors, there's nociceptors, which are actually your pain receptors, and your skin is going to pick up this information and then it's going to send it to the sensory neuron. So here we have our sense receptors in our hand and in our skin. And we do have specific neurons for pain called nociceptors, but you don't have to know that for this unit. Okay, so the next part that happens, I'll do a darker color so you can see better, okay, is the sensory neurons. So we had talked about these when we were looking at neurons. And this marker is dying, so I'll have to use a different one, which is fine. Okay, so the sensory neurons, and remember these are called the efferent neurons. Afferent, excuse me. Okay, so the sensory neurons are going to go from your fingers to your spinal cord. Okay, so again, we had talked about this earlier, that the sensory neurons are going to go from your sensory receptors to your spinal cord. Then what happens is there's specialized neurons in your central nervous system. Okay, so I'm going to draw a green dot there in the central nervous system, and these are called interneurons. Okay, and these are only in the central nervous system, so your brain and spinal cord. So what's happening here is that your brain is going to, your spinal cord is going to activate this spinal cord reflex. So what happens here is the sense receptors picks up something hot. Those sensory neurons are going to carry it to the interneuron, and then the interneuron is going to automatically route it back to your motor neurons as it is routing the information to the brain. So essentially what's happening is it's splitting the message. Okay, so let's first talk about the reflex. Okay, so what happens here, okay, is the interneurons are going to send this back to the motor neurons. And remember, the motor neurons are efferent. And again, the spinal cord is going to activate this reflex for you to move your hand. And the reason is it actually prevents more injury. Okay, so if you touch something hot, and if the message had to go from your spinal cord up to your brain, realize that it's hot, and then the message back down to your arm, you might be holding it for an extra second. And if you're touching something hot, that could be a significant amount of damage. So this actually does help us to prevent injury and enable survival. So definitely an evolutionary purpose. Okay, so the fifth part here then is going to be, I'm not going to draw it on the diagram, is going to be the muscle. Okay, so like your bicep muscle to move your hand. All right, so let's just go through this one more time. So what happens here is the sense receptors are going to pick up information that is that is pain or injury. Okay, the sense receptor then is going to send that message to the sensory neurons, and the sensory neuron has to go to the spinal cord regardless. Okay, if it's injury or not, sensory neurons have to send information to the central nervous system. Because this is injury, the spinal cord is going to activate the reflex. So what happens here is this inner neuron is going to tell the motor neurons that it has to move the bicep. So that you can move your hand from the injury. Okay, so what happens then, okay, is at the same time that this is all taking place, the inner neurons are sending that message to the brain. So what happens here is your spinal cord, you moves your arm, and then maybe a second later you realize that you have pain. Okay, your brain is not moving this reflex or causing this reflex. Your spinal cord is. Okay, so if you have any questions, please let me know.